Today, we become legends.
Only two things in life are certain, death and the SMITE is dying argument resurfacing every couple of years. Lately there's been a lot of talk about this in the community, mostly because of SMITE 2's announcement, and to a certain extent it makes sense that SMITE 1 would start stagnating or even dying after the announcement of a sequel. But is it actually dying? Let's take a look at the metrics. So first up we have Steam charts, which is probably the best way to look directly at how many people are playing SMITE compared to historical values. As always, Steam numbers aren't even half the total number of players because many SMITE gamers are on console, but we're mostly looking at the trend here, and whether the trend is up or down should be roughly the same for console as it is for PC. And console doesn't really have such open access to their player counts like Steam does, so this is kind of the best we've got. Steam charts tells a clear story. No, SMITE is not dying. As always, we got a nice bump in players at the start of year 11 and with the announcement of SMITE 2, which pulled almost identical numbers to the start of year 10. March's numbers for this year are also pretty much exactly where they were last year, and we're still a good bit above player counts from the last quarter of year 10. This is typical though given SMITE's seasonality. The player base always drops off to the lows going into the end of the year and then reclaims it all with a new season launch. Sure, compared to SMITE's peak players during the pandemic, we're down quite a bit, but to expect SMITE to ever return to that level of success is lunacy in my opinion, and SMITE's current player numbers are still well above the all-time lows the game experienced pre-pandemic. All things considered, Steam charts tells us that SMITE is doing exactly the same as it did last year and the year before that. But that's just one source. What about content creators? Does that tell us a different story? Well, sort of. Looking at the SMITE category as a whole on Twitch, we can see a clear but slow downtrend in viewership over the last year or so. It's not dramatic, and ignoring the recent spike from Summit trying out SMITE, we're basically at the same levels we were towards the end of Season 9, but there is a clear slight downward trend on viewership basically since year 10's launch. Looking at my own channel, it's a similar trend, with views slowly trending down over the course of the last year, and ignoring the spike from year 11 launch and SMITE 2's announcement, has mostly continued that trend this year as well. That's just one channel though. Let's take a look at a few other popular SMITE YouTubers. Looking at FinoK's channel, the same downtrend throughout the last year or two is there, but recently views on his channel have picked up to some of the higher levels in the last few years, ignoring this spike where I think he posted a COD clip or something that got millions of views. Weaken's channel is doing just fine, getting more views than usual and even hitting new highs recently. Incon's chart does show that same downward trend that the Twitch category and my channel have as well. Solo Double J has mostly been performing well compared to the last few years. He is down from a peak in June last year, but looking at a wider time frame, his channel is doing fine. The SMITE game channel itself did have the same downtrend going on throughout last year, but has picked up more recently, probably due to the SMITE 2 announcement and of course year 11 dropping. By the way, none of this is to reflect on the individual channels themselves. Hell, mine looks one of the worst out of all of these. It's just to try and get a wider overview of how SMITE is doing overall on YouTube, since it's not easy to get view numbers like it is on Twitch for the whole category. So overall, in terms of content creators and viewership for SMITE, the picture is a bit more murky. Steam charts player numbers clearly show the game is doing exactly the same as the last couple of years, and the player base overall is not dying. Content creators numbers do have some more room for interpretation though. Some are doing just fine, even better than ever, but others have been in a persistent downtrend for the last year or so, and the Twitch category as a whole is also seeing that similar downtrend. With that said though, it is worth noting that this downtrend we're seeing is in relation to higher numbers coming out of the pandemic. If we compare today's viewership on Twitch and YouTube to viewership from before 2020, most channels as well as the Twitch category as a whole are getting more viewership than they were back in 2019 and earlier. So on a longer timescale, SMITE is definitely not dying and is even growing, as it's bigger than it was for most of its life. But when compared to more recent numbers, there is a definite slight trend downwards. It's just hard to say reliably that SMITE's viewership and player numbers would ever have reached the heights they did without a global pandemic shutting us all in our homes. I think overall this data is actually quite positive. Player numbers are doing just fine and viewership is down a little but not massively and not across every channel. Considering a sequel just got announced and year 11 is clearly diluted in terms of content compared to year 10 with no God teaser that normally will bring a lot of hype and no plan for multiple seasons throughout the year like we had last year, the game is doing just fine considering these circumstances. Honestly, you could argue it's holding up better than it should be. Also, while this isn't objective data, I would be remiss not to mention the cutting of SPL, which I think definitely has had an impact on the game, especially for those more heavily invested in it or those wanting to become more heavily invested in it. Even if you're just watching this video, though, you're most certainly in the top 50% of Smite nerds that care about this kind of stuff way more than most. You might even be in that top 10% that are truly feeling the lack of pro play the way I and many others are. I think in the long term, having no pro scene would be hugely detrimental to a game like Smite and could be one of the contributing factors to the game supposedly dying. That said, the majority of Smite players really don't care whether there's a pro scene or not, and I guarantee you that many of Smite's core players don't even know it's gone. There's a reason Steam player numbers have been completely unaffected by there being no pro scene this year. The casuals just don't really care about it, and Smite has a much larger percentage of extremely casual players than other big MOBAs do. Also, we likely won't feel the long-term impact of the pro scene's removal because of Smite 2. Assuming the pro scene for Smite 2 gets off the ground and does as well or better than Smite 1's pro scene, it will have the same positive impact on Smite 2 that it had on Smite 1 for many years. With all this said though, just because Smite isn't actively dying doesn't mean it's not stagnant. It is and has been stagnant for basically the last 2 years or so, and if you want to look at a larger time frame, ignoring the COVID spike, the game has been basically stagnant its entire life. I don't think this is debatable, but I do think a lot of people confuse stagnation with the game actively dying. Could this change when Smite 2 goes into public alpha and then releases fully? Absolutely. We'll maybe take another look at this data once that happens, as it only makes sense that Smite 1 will eventually die once its direct sequel comes out publicly. It probably won't be instant, as there will be a certain amount of players that stick with Smite 1 for various reasons, like owning a last-gen console or wanting to keep their skins and progress, but I can't imagine Smite 1 lives for many years until the launch of Smite 2. But what do you think? Does Smite feel like it's dying to you personally? Let me know down below, and I'll catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.